Okay. Well, welcome, especially if you're just coming in new, or maybe you've never been here. You're part of the Heart to Heart community right away. And this community has been evolving for about 4 years now since the beginning of COVID. And today, our today's talk is going to be about really the Buddha's Four Noble Truths, 2,500-year-old insights of the Buddha, and then four practices too. So we're going to actually apply it. Now, I don't really give lectures, uh, and really isn't a talk. I like to look at it as a conversation between my heart, your heart, and the heart of the universe, whatever that is. Okay. Whatever you want to call that big heart that's running the whole thing. And so it's really a heart to heart kind of communication here. And even if you're listening later, sometime later, years from now on YouTube, listening to the talk, uh, as Michelangelo said, let's set our aspirations high. Let's try to listen with the ear of the heart, as Saint Benedict said. And what that is you're not just listening to the words, you're listening to the words, but also how the words resonate with your heart. The heart is the home of awareness. So be noticing what resonates with your heart. And you can jot something down if you like. You can write while you're listening. That's all okay. Uh, and so, all right. I've got some notes here that I don't really read them in the sense of not lecturing off of them, but they sort of, to go through this much material, I got some like pointers. And you don't have to write down, you don't have to take notes really. If you want the notes after, just send me an email, looselyfollow@gmail.com, and just put notes in the subject area, and I'll send the notes to you. And then, so you have a lot of the details. Okay, well, a little bit about the Buddha. If you never have seen the great movie called Little Buddha, I'd really recommend it because you'll get a lot of the background of just where these things came from in a very interesting uh, film. Uh, recommend it. Keanu Reeves plays the historical Buddha. It's quite a good way to sink into Buddhism. There's real Tibetan monks in it, and it's just great. It's just great. So Little Buddha is something to watch sometime if you want to go a little deeper into this. But Buddha, lived about 2,500 years ago, in a little kingdom in northern India, a bunch of kingdoms, and his father was the king. He was the prince. He had a couple of palaces, that one for the summer and then one for the winter, and then the spring or summer spring or fall he could go wherever he wanted. But he had a couple palaces. But he through conditions that happened to him, he realized that everybody else was suffering. He was being pampered behind the walls, but everybody else in the world was suffering, a lot of suffering. And he wanted to figure out, well, why were people suffering? Why wasn't everybody having a great time? So he left left the palace, went into the forest where there were ascetics practicing, Hindu ascetics, and he stayed for 6 years in there. And so he left everything to try to find out just this answer of why human beings suffer. And he eventually found out. And the heart of that is the Four Noble Truths. So it took him 6 years of just really ascetic living, and then finally to break through. And then for 40 years, he basically taught this with variations, but basically he was teaching this. So this is very old teaching. And I've been living with it for about 50 years. And I like to say that Buddha is my favorite Indian neurologist because he really he understood how the mind plays into the suffering of the world, not just our own personal suffering, but the suffering of the whole world, because we're sort of confused. And he straightened it out. So here's the first, the Four Noble Truths, and then we'll sort of I'll try to flesh them out as best I can, translate them. For instance, mostly when I first read my first books on Buddhism, they listed the first noble truth as life is suffering. And that was sort of a turnoff. Like, well, tell me something I don't know. That's why I got into Buddhism in the first place, was because I was so freaked out as a young teacher and stressed out. I said, well, maybe meditation and life is suffering. Well, gee, it seems like sort of like a killjoy approach. But so I'm going to translate that line, and I'm going to try to translate the Four Noble Truths into uh, 2024 American English. Let's put it that way. Now, what he sets out in these truths is somehow to work. It's sort of a commentary on what eclipses our essence, our essential self. What eclipses this light inside of us that could lead us through anything? Okay, uh, and he's shooting big, as Michelangelo said. The problem is not that you shoot big and you have high aspirations, but their aspirations are sort of low and we reach them and they don't do much for us. So this is a really high aspirational teaching. Um, the first noble truth is called the truth of suffering too. And these four truths, if you could write this down, you'll get a sense of where we're going. This is a medical model. Up to my left, I have a big picture of what they call the medicine Buddha, the healing Buddha. He's always in blue. He's trying to heal us. He's a doctor of the mind, and so he follows a medical model. And the first noble truth is about the symptom. You come into the office, you got a skin infection or whatever. You come in with the symptom, so it's going to work with symptom, and that's going to have a diagnosis. A diagnosis from a doctor is maybe a guess, like, well, maybe it's this, I don't know. Then what do? They send the third noble truth is about taking some tests. You get an MRI, CAT scan, the X-ray, so that they can see a little deeper. And we'll talk about that. And then the fourth noble truth is sort of like, so you go through that, symptoms, diagnosis, which is a hypothesis. Sometimes when they see the X-ray, they change it, but it's a diagnosis, a guess, and then you do the testing to really see deeper what's going on. The X-ray can see something the naked eye can't see. And then finally, the treatment. They'll give you a prescription. They'll say, do these things. So symptom, diagnosis, testing, treatment. That gives you an idea how he was working from a medical model. And that's the medicine Buddha. The Buddha is just trying to heal what suffering he can. So let's look into it. First of all, and we're working with spiritual vocabulary lately, the word he actually used when he said that what human beings experience, it was called dukkha. And in our letters, it would be dukkha. And he was talking about dukkha. And dukkha really means, again, it's in line with this model. It's a feeling of dis-ease, dis hyphen ease. It's a feeling of unease that human beings have, and I don't care how rich you are or how powerful you are. You feel stressed. You feel you have a kind of mental suffering of dis-ease. That's why the medical model fits, because he's talking about this dis-ease. Now we'll jump back to that, because that's really what the Buddha said was unnecessary suffering. So we want to get a little bit of granular idea of what real suffering means to human beings. Okay. There's necessary suffering and there's unnecessary suffering. First of all, the English word itself, suffering, if you look it up, it means to bear pain. And all the animals, all the sentient beings out there, they're suffering too, because that means when it's dry and you can't get a drink, well, they bear that pain. Suffering really means to bear the pain of the situation. Now, there's some givens as a human being. You can become ill. You can get injured, because we have bodies now. And then we age, and then we go through dying. those are the four givens of necessary suffering. There's no way to get out of that. And so necessary suffering is when those things happen, you bear the pain of it. Okay. Jung, Matthew Kelty out at the monastery, a great monk, he used to always quote, he was a Jungian, he quote Carl Jung. Jung said that the avoidance of necessary suffering is the cause of most mental illness. In other words, you get ill, you get injured, I'm aging, I'm going to be 75. Uh, there's a dying process. None of us are going to get out of that. We're all going to at least be ill one time. And we've all been injured, physically injured. It's just what it is to have a body in mind in a space of time. So these four things are things you have to learn how to bear that pain. There's no way out of it. I mean, the survival mode is in the end a mission impossible because this body and mind is not going to survive. We're going to die. Now, the sacred mode, whatever you want to call that essence that we are, that's not material, that's not going to be diminished by any of these things. Okay, that's your ace in the hole. And so he's going to say, well, we got to work with that. That's our ace in the hole because that's not wearing out. That's not getting older. It might be obscured so you don't have access to this pure awareness, to this light on the inside. Yeah, it can be obscured to where you don't even think you have it or you doubt it. But it's not going to be diminished by time. It's you're dealing with eternity there. So that's kind of ace in the hole. So that's necessary suffering, illness, injury, aging, dying. And that includes the suffering when people you love go through these things too, you see. Okay, now unnecessary suffering, dukkha, he was really pinpointing that. He said, you have to learn to bear these things that are, I'm grateful to have a body and a mind. They're great. It's a great blessing. And everything outside my window here, even inside the house, everything has to bear the necessary pain of being existence in space and time. I mean, this pen isn't going to be this pen forever. It's going to eventually break down, even material, just material objects. Okay, now unnecessary suffering, what he calls dukkha, that's different. That's living a life that's identified with only form, with only our body and mind, with only the egoic self. And when you identify with that, if that's who you think you are, and that's only what you think you are, if you don't have any concept of this, you don't even have an inkling that there's something more than that. Life's a bitch, and then you die. I saw that on my brother's wife the day she was getting married. He should have known better. But when you have that view, life's a bitch, and then you die. Well, there's a certain way to go through the world, but that's dukkha. Boy, that's dukkha like squared. But this sense of almost continuous disease, no matter low level, it can be anywhere from low level refrigerator hum, just tension and anxiety to just full blown panic and fear and hatred and all that stuff. It's a kind of continuum that can happen. But the main thing, and we'll double back to it really in the future talks about, well, it all depends on the fact that you think, here I am, and I'm just my body and my mind, my ego's running. That we're just survival mode, and that's a mission impossible. I mean, even if you live to be 100, the Dalai Lama says, he says, what is that next to eternity? Yeah. So if your goal is to live to be 100, you're shooting too low. You're probably not gonna make it. And what if you do? Big deal. If this all your whole life, you haven't realized that you're much, much more than that. You're a hybrid. So we have the survival mode, and then we have the sacred mode. And we're here. The only reason you're here is because You sense there better be something more than this. Okay. So the identification with form. And you can actually be doing spirituality and still be identified with me. Self improvement is just about me. Even the Enneagram, which is a great tool to liberation from dukkha, if you can identify, you say, well, I'm a one on the Enneagram. What do you expect? Well, you're not. The Enneagram shows you basically your pattern of resistance to life. The Enneagram shows you, first of all, and it's stark and it's accurate. It shows you how you have a defensive shield to never getting hurt again. Doesn't work. It's like in Israel, they have the Iron Dome. Any incoming missiles, it's going to shoot them down. That's sort of what the Enneagram shows you on the surface. So nobody's a 9 or a 1, or that is your pattern of defense, of resistance, you see. But if you identify with it, I've had somebody say, well, I'm a 6. What do you expect? And I said, I expect you to understand that that's not who you are. It's how you defend yourself. And in a way, if you defend yourself from injury, by this world, and this world can injure you. We all know that. We've all been injured, emotionally and physically. If your whole preoccupation is defend yourself from injury, yeah, you can live to be 100, but it's not much of a life. Same old shit, different day in the castle. Castle turns into a jail. So that's the first thing. It's a symptom. It's just this unease. It's just this feeling that I don't, I don't know what I'm looking for, but I know it's not this. Even if you're very rich, the lives of the rich and famous it's a scandal, really, because they think money is the thing. Another way you could say is, whoever dies with the most toys wins. So people are just collecting toys and trying to become comfortable in this basic dis-ease that they feel because they think it's all about me and I am separate from everybody else. Everybody else is an object. And so we're going to have to unpack that later, but that's the beginning. That's sort of the disease, this disease. And so you come to the doctor, you seek something in spirituality. Well, that's a wise move. Okay. So the second noble truth is called the origin of the disease. The origin. You're looking for, you're trying to diagnose, well, where's this come from? Well, the Buddha said it's caused by causes and conditions that are impersonal. And we're going to spend some time in future talks talking about that. Hidden beneath this kind of ignorant fog of believing, here I am, and then here's the rest of the world, that the word separate self, isolated self, beneath that fog of what the Buddha would call ignorance. We're going to do a whole Sunday on ignorance. Doesn't mean low IQ. It just means thinking here I am, and here's everybody else. Beneath that, there's a kind of churning always of grasping, of striving, of this seemingly separate self. Now here's another vocabulary word for you, that kind of round and round kind of hamster wheel of, gee, when I get my degree, then I'll be happy. When I find the woman of my dreams, then I'll be happy. When I get $1 billion, then I'll be happy. It's when I do this, then I'll be happy. That whole kind of hamster wheel that never seems to deliver. In Sanskrit, the Buddha, with the sacred language of both Hindus and Buddhists in the beginning, just like Latin was the sacred language of Christianity, European Christianity, that kind of round and round hamster wheel that never delivers. It's called samsara, Samsara. And those of you who have ever heard Sago Rinpoche's great Rest in Natural Grace Peace, he says, rest in natural great peace, this exhausted mind. It's exhausting. Hamster wheel, there's nothing new there. You think you're going to get it, but then you get it, and that's not it. And so you round and round this hamster wheel. He says, rest in natural great peace, this exhausted mind, beaten helplessly by neurotic thoughts and these incessant waves of what he called in the ocean of samsara. It's this condition, and it's a kind of round and round thing. Somebody once said, "What's a good image of samsara?" And I said, "Well, go in the bathroom, lift the lid, and flush the toilet, and look and watch it." you know, uh, it's just this round and round that you know your own mind does. It's a closed circle. That's why it's same old shit, different day when you live in that, because nothing can get in. You know, see, nothing can get in. And so there's causes and conditions for these, and that's a whole other thing to go in depth to. But he's just saying it's not your fault. That just is part of the survival mode. When you live in the survival mode, it's a closed circle, and nothing new can really come in. And something, and you don't have access to what you're really looking for, which is that that sacredness that is part of being a hybrid human being. You have survival mode, sacred mode. So we're going to look into all these. So this is just an overview. So that's the diagnosis. Hey, you think you're a separate self? You're going to suffer dukkha if you do. Okay. So we'll go back to these, in the future, but that's the basis of it. And so then he says the third thing is to let's test this out. Let's look deeper. And so the Buddha is pioneering something that is brilliant news right now. That the way out of the disease is to pay attention to the disease. Because and the ignorance is, I don't want to look at it. I'm unwilling to look at it. I'm unwilling to look deeply at this. No, and we all do that. There's certain things we don't want to look at, but to look at this basic, unease that human beings have. And so he said the way out of this kind of incessant anxiety, and we all vary, and life circumstances come in, and maybe the anxiety becomes greater, and it becomes panic, it becomes fear. We're going to kill these people. I hate those people. They're the problem. There is no other people who are the problem. We get rid of all the Jews, then Germans are all going to be happy. Yeah, and it really didn't work. Now, let's stop these crazy, insane immigrants who are trying to come in and take our stuff. Get rid of them all. Then we'll all be happy. Won't have to vote again. It'll all be perfect. Well, this is magical thinking. And this is also thinking there's an enemy out there that's causing you to be anxious or fearful or whatever. The Buddha blows all that out of the water. He says the way out of the disease is to go inward and pay attention to the disease, because it's not on the surface of things. Look deeply and unmask its dynamics, the tense, limited consequences of this dynamics. Because the basic things, if you're living in the survival mode, which is helpful, but if you live in there totally, it's a very feeling of limitation. There must be more than this. There is. That's the idea of your sights on something too low and you reach it, as Michelangelo said. So the methods of the Buddha gives us these methods of doing a CAT scan, doing an MRI, and the names for these words are meditation. That's why the Buddha is you always see him in meditation posture. And formal meditation, they has different names, centering prayer, Zen meditation, all traditions have some form of stop looking outside and start to look inside. And the Buddha really was the pioneer in that. Okay, he even invented monasteries. He says, well, let's just, lower our overhead. We'll all hang together. We'll beg for our one meal and during the day. And the rest of the time, we're looking inside. We're running these tests. Inquiry, mindfulness is what, that's a term that you hear now. Mindfulness is just, hey, taking a look at this. Let's just stop running around and really try to take a look inside. Mindfulness is what you're doing at 24/7, 365. Okay, so that's the testing. You got to look inside. You got to go deeper. And then finally, the healing of the disease is the treatment. You can, I know a guy. He's married to my niece, uh, and he had an unbelievable collection of books on Buddhism and Hinduism, and then but he never did the treatment. And so he said one time, he said, "Well, tell me honestly." He's a psychologist, and he said, "Tell me honestly, what's sitting your ass down on the cushion for 50 years? You know, back then it was 25 years, and that was about 25." And he said, "What has it really given you?" Because he said, I know the concepts. I read the books, and he did. He has a vast library, but he never sat. And that was a good question. Well, you never can integrate the information. It's just information. You got to understand the difference between information and wisdom. We're drowning in information now. I mean, don't even go to your emails. I mean, it's just filled with pleas for money and all kinds of other random information. Information is not wisdom. Wisdom is when you connect, you integrate everything on the inside, and that takes some practices. Okay, uh, what they call upaya in Sanskrit, skillful means, skillful practices. From and all the authentic spiritual traditions have them. See, so that's really what what the rubber meets the road there. Then you can, but it has to do with looking into it. And without a skillful practice, it's just going to be up here because reading the books it gives you information, but somehow you have to take that information down into the body and into the heart and sit with it. Uh, and then somehow, and it's a slow process, a slow process, um, but it takes practice. It takes, I'm 75, and I didn't always have this viewpoint. And I spent a lot of energy and a lot of my time teaching kids. That was my vocation, and that just took most of my life energy. It was like I was in survival mode because it's a hard job. Did that for 30 years, and um, and I'm glad I did because I mean that's a noble profession because you're trying to wake people up from living a life where you miss the important thing, which is this other part of you. Now this has been sort of bliss for 20 some years. Uh, just working with somebody said, "What's it like to teach adults?" And I said, "Well, it's bliss because they all show up. They all show up. And they're all motivated because they're suffering, and that's great. It's great. It's great. But so when you're in an active life, like I was talking to somebody who's young, and I got a couple of guys who just graduated from college. I'm surprised they even want to know about this. They're old souls, but one guy's running a bar, and the other girl is working for a solar company, and so they have an active life. And then if you have kids, and you have kids to raise, there's the active life takes up a lot of energy. But when most of us here uh, have a lot of time on our hands, what are we doing with it? Well, I'm focusing on getting to know the sacred part of myself. So when we meditate, I have a poem calling it Line with the Divine. When, I show up every day to align with this, to actually sit down and actually touch this in a kind of wordless uh, communion, you know. And if you have a meditation practice, you you have to have a way to just leave the world of thinking for the world of being, for the world of awareness. Um, and so that's the first skillful practice that the Buddha talks about. Uh, is a meditation or mindfulness. Mindfulness is just meditation on the fly, you see. Uh, And if you don't have that, you're just going to stay on the surface of things. And I'm committed to it now. It's the most important thing, really. It helps me do all the other things that not only survival things, but you know, helps me be a better husband, helps me be a better father. I wasn't really very good at either of those things when I was just working all the time. So yeah, um, Rumi is helpful here. Rumi knew all this in the 13th century. uh, 13th century Islamic mystic, lived in Turkey his whole life. He's buried in Turkey. Listen to this, because this is a famous one of Rumi. He said, today, like every other day, we wake up empty and afraid. Interesting. Rumi's including himself. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and afraid. We wake up, I can't tell you the amount of my days that I woke up into dreaming and into my to-do list. Today, like every other day, we wake up empty and afraid. What was I afraid of? Well, I wouldn't get it all done. You know, uh, he said, don't rush to your desk and begin working. I mean, I'm a recovering workaholic. Don't rush to your desk and begin working. Instead, take down a musical instrument. Make what you love be what you do. There are hundreds of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. We started with the ground under our feet, you see, and he's talking about the ground of being. There are hundreds of ways, you know, we, there's hundreds of ways to connect with the sacred. Now, if you start your day doing that, this is, I think, something that's hard to dispute. If you start your day doing that in some way, and again, there's hundreds of ways to do it, but if you start your day with touching the sacred, um, the day the day tends to go the way it starts. And many of my days for decades started with fear. And fear is what motivates the survival mode, and rightly so. Uh, there's dangerous things out there. Somebody once asked my first Zen teacher, Suzuki Roshi, how much ego do we really need? And he says, well, just enough so you don't step in front of a bus. Which is a good idea, so you don't want to get rid of your ego. That's nonsense. But how you start your day, if you start the day with the sacred, and when you're in an active life and you got to be, like my daughter has to leave, she's a nurse, she has to leave the house at 6:30 to go to work, be there by 7, or you got kids to raise. You have to find it. It's a real challenge to start the day with the sacred, but somehow, used to have morning prayers that people said in the Christian tradition. Well, that was one way you started the day. I start in bed before I get up. Uh, with a kind of prayer myself to touch the sacred. Okay. Now, another one of the practices, and that's on the fly. That's just mindfulness. You can just realize you have a sacred part of you. It's not about not about what you're doing. It's who you are. Okay. So how you start today, and he says, don't rush to your desk and begin working. And he didn't, he said, take down a musical instrument. That's code for your practice. Make what you love be what you do. And so as you're forming your own way, sacred way to begin the day, it's got to be very personal. And notice when you actually start building a spiritual practice, it's because of love, not because of fear. If you're trying to improve yourself, if you're doing spiritual practice to improve yourself, you're still working on fear. That's still a motivation, and it's a waste of time. You have to find a practice that you love, because it's sort of like that part of that essence is that, and you totally miss that. Okay. So here's the 4 practices that I do. They work for me, and you can find your own, build your own practice, make what you love be what you do. There are hundreds of ways. There are thousands of ways. There are millions of ways to kneel and kiss the ground. In other words, to greet the sacred in the morning. And then the rest of the day, you at least have that point of you realize I'm more than what I do. I'm more than what thing people think of me. I have something that's sacred, you see. I start normally I wake up and I make a cup of coffee. And then after that, I do some sacred reading. Now this is called Lectio Divina. This is another great practice. Uh, that's where poetry comes in. Maybe all you have because your life is more active and all you have is a little time. So maybe you read a short poem of Rumi or something, but something, a voice from somebody who's in touch with that. You're not just reading although there are sacred novels too, but those are longer. You really need a way to touch it uh, quickly if you're busy. I got a lot of time. So I'm reading I'm taking a cup of coffee and I'm doing my sacred reading for an hour or so. Uh, I don't have a normal life because this is what I do. I was reading into spending the whole week reading into the Four Noble Truths, reading texts, thinking about it. So that's sort of important. If you read anything, rather than watching hours of TV, which we all do too much of, just spend a little time reading, having somebody else's voice in your mind who has been in. You read Rumi, he's a guy who's been in touch with the sacred, who's integrated this thing. So reading a Rumi poem, you know, it can put you in touch with the sacred. It always does for me, or some other poet. The poets are great. Read a little scripture, Christian scripture, Hindu scripture. It doesn't matter. Sacred stuff. So sacred reading, sacred pausing is what I'm talking about. Because today we're pausing our life and we're spending some time in retreat. This is a big pause to really consider the sacred. So you could do it formally with a meditation practice, or informally throughout the day. The monks at the monastery here, Merton's Monastery, Gethsemani, which brought me to Kentucky, 7 times a day the bells ring and they put down what they're doing. Merton he was one of the best monks, most faithful monks. He could be in the middle of writing a great paragraph. The bells rang. In 5 minutes, he's in choir and they're chanting sacred text, the Psalms. And so it was an interesting way. 7 times a day, you drop the thought of me and thinking, and you're coming in, you're chanting sacred text. And so it gradually breaks down that freight train of momentum of the separate self. You come in with a group and you're chanting sacred text. So that's, you might just at work or when you're feeling crazy, just sit for a minute and take a couple breaths. I do centering prayer. So we have a sacred word, which is anybody can do. You don't have to, anybody can have a sacred word. It's a word that I breathe in when I'm going crazy and I breathe out the sacred word. I'll do it 2 or 3 breaths. It grounds you again. So that's sacred pausing, sacred reading, sacred pausing. Sacred immersion would be the third thing. And nature is right outside your door. You can just go out and sit in the front porch and just, once you go, I love this space that we're in, the Zendo, and I love Loose Leaf Hollow. But when you go out the door, you're in a boundless space, you see. It's what the Japanese folks called bathing in the forest. It just means you're going out of this space that we're in here. As beautiful as it is, it's limited, just sort of like the space in your head, sort of like your idea of yourself. And when you go outside, you're in a world that's beyond control. Hummingbirds come and go as they will. It doesn't matter, you're just in a whole blooming, buzzing world, and you find your place in it. That's called doing a kind of sacred immersion. It's all sacred out there. It's all sacred in here. When you go outside, there's a difference between walking the road and thinking about stuff and walking the road uh, with full awareness. I don't walk the road for exercise. I'm not trying to beat my time that I, walk my 2 kilometers in a faster time. People do that, their watches are measuring everything. When you're going out into nature and immersed in nature, you're into an immeasurable there. The Buddhists have the four immeasurables, you see, and nature's one of them. The Buddha sat in nature for 6 years. Jesus rarely had any place, any roof. He was in the world, out in nature, and it's immense. Okay, so those three for sure. Sacred reading. Always have a book that you can listen to somebody who really knows what this sacredness is about. And it's nice. For me, it's a great thing to actually have another voice in my head besides my own. So you're listening with the ear of the heart to this voice on the page. Then pause, formal meditation, mindfulness during the day, breathe yourself, like little islands of contemplation during the day. Sacred immersion in nature as much as possible. I try to walk every day. Now I walk before I sit because it's so hot. In the winter, it's reversed. Spring or summer, it depends on the deal after I read, but I always start with the sacred voice in my head. And then finally, the last one, which I think is important to not only the 12 steps, which is a unique American kind of spirituality, but all spirituality is a sense of sacred service. You know, somehow sharing. And this is a big thing. If you're retired, like many of us are, our whole sense was, you are what you do, and well, I'm not doing anything anymore. But the sacred service is you have time when you're doing all this other work to really find out what your unique gift is. Listen to David White on this. The poets are the guys who are understanding the sacred, you see, in short form. But this is really these couple of stanzas. I wake up in the morning reciting these to myself. This is my morning prayer. It's from a poem by David White called "What to Remember When Waking," which is a perfect thing when you wake up. It's better than your to-do list to remember this. White said in the that first hardly noticed moment in which you wake, there's a small opening into the new day, which closes the moment you begin your plans. Oh, there's more than that, but gee, if you only know that, that's brilliant. In that first hardly noticed moment in which you awake, there's a small opening into a new day, which closes the moment you begin your plans. Then he goes on to say, what you can plan is too small for you to live. What a line. What you can plan is too small for you to live. What you can live wholeheartedly will make plans enough for the vitality hidden in your soul. To become human is to become visible while sharing what is hidden as your gift to the world. Well, what you can plan is too small for you to live. I mean, the survival mode is helpful, but it's too small for a whole life. If you live there, it's not much of a life. What you can plan is too small for you to live. Because I'm a big planner. The planning is the way I keep myself safe. See, what you can plan is too small for you to live. What you can live wholeheartedly. Notice he pivots to the heart here, which is where the sacred lives, not the physical heart, but the sacred heart. Okay, what you can live wholeheartedly will make plans enough for the vitality hidden in your soul. The soul is that, in at least in Christian terms, is that sense of that essential nature that's not bound by time, space. It wasn't born, and it will never die. He said, but there's vitality there. That's why when you feel dead or depressed or whatever, well, of course, because you're out of touch with where the vitality is. The word in Greek for that was anima and animus, the masculine and feminine soul, and the word animates. You lose your animation when you're out of touch with the sacred, with the soul. So what you can live wholeheartedly will make plans enough for the vitality hidden in your soul. And they said become human is to become visible while carrying what is hidden as your gift to the world. What is hidden is your unique form of grace, your unique thing, and everybody has something that the world needs. What is it? And that's really important to as you age to find out what that is. I mean, these guys who are, running the 100 meters in 9 seconds or whatever, yeah, that's a gift now, but boy, you're not going to do that forever. You're not even probably going to do it by the next Olympics, you see. Uh, uh, so you all have something that this world needs, and and it's very hard to live. That's where the meaning comes in because you're part of something bigger. Separate self is not part of something bigger. It's separate. See. So now, so those first hardly noticed moments when you awake, there's a small opening into the new day that closes the moment you begin your plans. Yeah, beautiful. And there's more to the poem than that, but that's the thing that really gets me. That's how I start my day, reciting that one. So that's a good prayer. Yeah. So if you want the notes, just send me the word notes, and I'll send it, and you'll get the David Whyte, you get the Rumi, and you get sort of some of the details. That's a lot to digest. So now we always take a break, 15 minutes, just to really pay attention to, out of all those words, 45 minutes of words, what really resonated. Jot that down, and then we'll be able to come back in 15 minutes, 15 after, and we'll be able to sit with all of this and just really to digest it and to also resonate with it deeper and also to see how it really fits with your life. We'll take a break after that, and then we'll have the last 45 minutes of you, and I hope you can hang around for the 11:15 Eastern until noon, because that's when we all get a chance to talk about what really resonated with you. That's the heart to heart of the community. Okay, well, 15 minutes and we'll be sitting again. Thanks for listening.